Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar. My name is Lisa Rosenow, and I'm with Evergreen Technology Consulting, or ETC for short. I'll be your host today. This webinar will be the final episode of our 7-part summer series about the 2018 WSEC commercial provisions. The primary topic we'll be covering today are the requirements for additional energy efficiency credits that are defined in Section C406. Many of you have attended multiple episodes of our training series. We really appreciate everyone hanging in there with us as we've transitioned to this new method of training delivery. Before we get started, let's cover a few housekeeping items. Everyone's audio will be muted to avoid background interference. If you have questions, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section. At the end of the presentation, we'll walk through a few of your questions. During this presentation, you'll have the opportunity to upvote questions that you are most interested in. This helps us prioritize which questions to tackle first during our Q&A session. After the webinar, we'll put together a list of all the participant questions posted, along with responses from our Energy Code technical team, and then we'll send this out as a supporting resource to everyone who registered. If you experience any technical difficulties, please communicate this to us via chat. We'll do our best to resolve whatever issues you may be experiencing. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our new WSEC website. Okay, so let's get started. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about who ETC is and what we do. Our team provides tech support for the commercial provisions of the Washington State Energy Code. We also administer the new Technical Support and Compliance Documentation web tool, and the address for that is waenergycodes.com. We provide on-call tech support through 3 avenues, through our telephone hotline, through email inquiries, or through our online inquiry form, which is under the Ask a Question webpage. We also have a new on-demand training webpage. We would like to extend our thanks to the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. They support energy efficiency programs and services throughout the Pacific Northwest region. It's through their generous support and the support of their utility partners that we are able to provide technical services and training for the Washington State Energy Code to the design and construction industry. So let's review the topics we've covered this summer. This webinar is the final episode of our 7-part series about the 2018 WSEC commercial provisions. The topics we've covered include building envelope, mechanical systems, lighting and electrical systems, and surface water heating and refrigeration systems. We also welcomed the experts from the Integrated Design Lab and Pacific Northwest National Labs to provide information about the new Total System Performance Ratio, or TSPR requirement. All of our webinars are posted on the new on-demand training webpage of our WSEC website. Future trainings later this year and early next year will include step-through instructions for the online compliance tools and focus trainings on what we find to be the hottest topics in the new code based on industry feedback through our technical support services. As many of you are aware, the Washington State Building Code Council voted to extend the adoption date to February 1st, 2021. This extended schedule provides extra time to ramp up on all the new code requirements. Note that they have addressed a few errata items which have been incorporated into the second printing. This latest edition of the 2018 WSEC has been posted by the Washington State Building Code Council on their new website and is free to download. So a few words about code interpretation. This presentation represents ETC's unofficial interpretation of code intent. We've been doing this a long time, so we're able to offer a well-informed perspective. However, we have to inform everyone who contacts us for Energy Code support that our technical support team is not an affiliate, nor do we speak for the Washington State Building Code Council. So additional energy efficiency credits is a big topic in the 2018 WSEC. Here are the details that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the new credit accounting system. And then we're going to get into a few details about applying credits to shell and core and initial tenant improvement projects. And then we'll cover some details about all the different credits. So the envelope energy efficiency credits, lighting, mechanical, service water heating, and kitchen energy efficiency credits, and the online renewable energy credit. And we'll also show you how to utilize the WSEC commercial web tool to document credit compliance. So let's dive right in and talk about the new way that additional energy efficiency credits are to be accounted for in the 2018 WSEC. Energy efficiency credits are now weighted based on occupancy type and modeled energy performance value. Note that in the 2018 WSEC, what was formerly referred to as options are now called packages and credits. Each package is assigned a certain number of credits based on the occupancy type. The packages have been divided into 6 general categories based on IBC occupancy types. They include Group R1 Hotel Motel, Group R2 Multifamily, Group B Business Occupancies, Group E Education and Daycare, Group M Mercantile or Retail, and then there's a catch-all for all other occupancies. So the detail that everyone always wants to know is, when do I have to comply with this requirement? Section C406 applies to new construction, including shell and core, first occupancy build-out of a tenant space or the initial TI, building additions, and existing buildings that require full compliance with the 2018 WSEC. Also note that the Washington State Building Code Council clarified via official interpretation that C406 applies to all levels of space conditioning. So this includes low energy, equipment buildings, semi-heated, fully conditioned, and refrigerated coolers and freezers. Recall that existing buildings that require full compliance with the 2018 WSEC include a change in space conditioning and a change in occupancy. So for a change in space conditioning, that includes a space that's converted from low energy to semi-heated or conditioned space, or a space converted from semi-heated to conditioned space. And a change in occupancy in the code refers to a space converted from F, S, or U occupancy to something other than F, S, or U, a space converted to Group R from another use or occupancy, and a Group R dwelling unit converted to commercial use or occupancy if the dwelling unit was permitted prior to July 1st of 2002. Under the new system, all fully conditioned and semi-heated areas of a building must show compliance with at least 6 credits. Under the exceptions, the code states that low energy spaces, equipment buildings, and building additions that are less than 1,000 square feet, they only have to show compliance with 3 credits. So let's walk through a quick example of what this might look like for, say, a bank building. The project could demonstrate compliance with one of the reduced lighting power packages, which is worth 2 credits for a Group B building, and include a high-performance dedicated outside air system, which is worth 4 credits for a Group B building. Or the project could demonstrate compliance with the HVAC equipment efficiency package, which is worth 3 credits for Group B, and meet the requirements for enhanced envelope, which is worth 3 additional credits for Group B. Where things get a little tricky is when the building has either multiple occupancies or when the project is constructed in multiple phases. A common scenario of a phase project is when the building is permitted as a shell and core, followed by an initial tenant improvement permit. The WSEC refers to an initial tenant improvement or first build-out as a tenant space. Under shell and core projects, all built-out areas of the building are required to comply with 6 credits. So for example, the building envelope may comply with the enhanced envelope credit, and the heating and cooling system serving, say, the elevator machine room and the lobby area may comply with the HVAC equipment efficiency credit. The unfinished areas of the building are not required to comply yet with C406. Compliance for those areas shall be covered under the initial tenant improvement permit. To make it even more interesting, if the building has multiple tenant spaces, it is acceptable to mix and match credit types. So, for example, in a shopping mall, a retail store may comply with the lighting controls credit, and a restaurant could comply with the DOAS credit. Clear as mud? Well, regardless of how the building is permitted, the bottom line is that when the building is fully built out, all building areas shall comply with a combined total of 6 credits. So let's get into the weeds just a little bit more. My apologies for the wordiness on the next 2 slides. This language in the code's a little unclear, so we've included the relevant details in these slides to help clarify our understanding of the intent. If the shell and core project includes compliance with one of the envelope credits or the on-site renewable credit, the code says that subsequent tenant spaces projects may claim eligibility for these credits when demonstrating compliance with C406. The number of credits assigned to the tenant space is based on the occupancy type of the tenant space, so not the shell and core, but the tenant space. If the envelope is altered under the tenant space project, the jurisdiction may require the envelope to be reevaluated to confirm that the alteration did not cause the envelope to be out of compliance with C406. The jurisdiction may require an updated UA calculation, or they could require an air barrier retest. There's a similar scenario if the shell and core project includes a central HVAC or surface water heating system that complies with one of the efficiency credits. If the central HVAC or surface water heating system is sized to serve the entire building or building addition and is installed under the initial shell and core permit, then subsequent tenant space projects, they can qualify for the number of credits assigned to the occupancy type of the tenant space. So similar to the envelope and air barrier credit that we talked about earlier. For the tenant space to qualify, the scope of the project shall include the HVAC and or surface water heating distribution system and equipment that would be required to serve the tenant space area that the central system was designed to support. If the tenant space systems are not connected to the central HVAC or surface water heating system, then the shell and core credits cannot be applied to the tenant space. So in a nutshell, if the mechanical systems or surface water heating systems, if they're installed under the shell and core project, those credits can be carried over to the tenant spaces as long as all of the elements that are required to complete those systems are included in the tenant space scope of work. For mixed-use buildings that include multiple occupancies within the same building permit, the project may demonstrate compliance by area weighting the number of credits by building occupancy type. So if, say, the project is a 4-story building with 1 floor of retail and 3 floors of apartments, the credits applied to the retail floor are weighted at 25%, and the credits applied to the apartments are weighted at 75%. Okay, so we got through all of those details. So now let's talk about the credit packages. So there are 6 efficiency credit categories. For envelope, there are credits for thermal envelope performance and for air leakage. For lighting, there are credits for lighting controls and lighting power. For HVAC, there are credits for equipment efficiency and dedicated outside air systems. There is also credit for surface water heating systems, kitchen equipment, and on-site renewable energy. Let's start with envelope. There are 2 envelope efficiency credit packages: enhanced thermal envelope performance and reduced air leakage. In a nutshell, to comply with the enhanced envelope credit, the project must demonstrate compliance via the component performance path, or the UA trade-off path. The proposed total envelope UA must be 15% lower than the target allowable envelope UA. So you would be applying a 0.85 multiplier to the target allowed UA. This credit may be applied to the whole building or to the building addition. For the reduced air leakage credit, testing must be performed by a third-party testing agency. The maximum allowed air leakage rate cannot exceed 0.17 CFM per square foot, and that is for the air barrier surface area, so not the square foot area of the building, but the enclosure under test. This credit may be applied to the whole building, building addition, or tenant space. So here's a credit weighting for these packages. Note that a Group R2 building can satisfy all 6 credits with the enhanced envelope credit. The WSEC commercial web tool addresses the enhanced envelope credit. First, the user selects component performance as the compliance method. Note that prior to applying the enhanced envelope credit, this example project complies via component performance, as is noted right here. Then select the Enhanced Envelope Ratio button in the info bar under UA Calculation Adjustment. The web tool applies the 0.85 multiplier to the calculations and checks for compliance with the enhanced envelope credit. In this example project, the proposed UA exceeds the code target UA after the 0.85 multiplier has been applied. The web tool generates a UA calculation output report that is similar to the ENVUA Excel form. Here's what the component performance report looks like for our example project prior to applying the enhanced envelope credit. And here's what it shows after the credit has been applied. Note in the upper right corner, it provides the compliance status, and in the lower right corner, it shows that the 0.85 multiplier has been applied to the target UA. Using this information, the designer can then determine what adjustments may be needed in their envelope design to comply with this credit. So now let's talk about the reduced air leakage credit. To summarize what we've covered back in episode 1, which was the envelope webinar, the changes to the building air leakage test criteria represent one of the most substantive changes in the 2018 WSEC. Under the 2015 WSEC, the target leakage rate is 0.4 CFM per square foot, and passing the test is optional. Under the 2018 WSEC, the target's been lowered to 0.25 CFM per square foot, and all commercial buildings are now required to pass. Residential buildings have been required to pass the blower door test for a couple of code cycles now. Requiring this for commercial buildings is more complicated because there are many different types of commercial buildings. The higher the ratio between the envelope surface area and the floor area, the more difficult it can be to meet this criteria. Building enclosure testing agencies have reported that large buildings with a low envelope area to floor area ratio routinely are able to pass the new 0.25 CFM per square foot target, provided that this target was known during the design process. For small commercial buildings, and buildings with components that are often not well sealed, such as roll-up doors, this target may be more difficult to achieve. We anticipate that there will be a learning process initially as the industry adjusts to this new requirement. For the reduced air leakage credit under the 2015 WSEC, the target is 0.25 CFM per square foot. Testing must be performed by a third-party testing agency, and the building is required to pass. Under the 2018 WSEC, this target's been lowered to 0.17 CFM per square foot. Now let's talk about lighting systems. There are 2 lighting efficiency credit package types: reduced interior lighting and advanced lighting controls. To comply with a reduced interior lighting power credit, the total connected lighting power density must be lower than the code maximum lighting power allowance. There are separate credits for 10% lower and 20% lower than the code LPA, and this credit may be applied to the whole building, building addition, or the tenant space. For enhanced lighting controls, each luminaire shall be individually addressed and include occupancy and daylight sensing and continuous dimming. They shall be controlled by a digital control system. Also, this credit may be applied to the whole building, building addition, or the tenant space. Here's the credit weighting for these packages. Note that a Group M building can satisfy all 6 credits, with the higher of the 2 reduced lighting power credit packages. To provide context for the changes to the reduced lighting power credits, let's review a few details from Episode 5, the Lighting and Electrical webinar. In the 2018 WSEC, overall lighting power allowances have been reduced by roughly 10%. This is not an across-the-board reduction. Each space type was evaluated based on the lighting needs of the space and the types of lighting technologies most commonly used. Some of the individual allowances were lowered by as much as 25%, while others were unchanged. There are also several changes to the additional lighting power allowances. The general 2% allowance that was based on ceiling height, that's no longer available. In the 2015 WSEC, this applied to spaces with ceiling heights greater than 20 feet and in office and library areas that had ceiling heights greater than 9 feet. The additional retail display allowances have been reduced by about 25%. And there are 2 new allowances that have been added for ornamental lighting and for lighting used to highlight a whiteboard or chalkboard in a classroom. To qualify under an additional allowance, display, highlight, or ornamental lighting fixtures must be controlled separately from general area lighting. In the 2015 WSEC, the interior lighting power option requires the proposed lighting power density to be at least 25% lower than the WSEC lighting power allowance. In the 2018 WSEC, this one option has been divided into 2 credit packages, with 1 credit for projects where the LPD is 90% or less than the lighting power allowance, and the other for projects where the LPD is 80% or less than the LPA. Stated differently, there are credits available for projects where the lighting serving a building or space is 10% or 20% lower than the code maximum LPA. And note that this is an either-or credit, meaning they can't be combined. And these credits may be determined using either the building area method or the space-by-space method. The WSEC Commercial Web Tool supports compliance via the building area method and the space-by-space method. Note that for the building area method, each building area type is verified separately for compliance. For the space-by-space method, all of the LPAs are combined and the total proposed lighting power is compared to the total lighting power allowance value. If the designer wishes to check to see if their project meets the interior lighting power additional efficiency option, they can turn it on and off here. The 2015 WSEC edition of the web tool addresses the reduced lighting power density option that requires a lighting power density that is 25% lower than the code lighting power allowance. In the 2018 WSEC web tool, it is expanded to handle the 2 reduced lighting power density credits for 10% and 20% lower than code. Note that prior to applying the reduced interior lighting power option, this example project complies via space-by-space. The web tool applies the 0.75 multiplier to the calculations and checks for compliance with the reduced interior lighting power option. In this example project, the proposed lighting power density exceeds the lighting power allowance after the 0.75 multiplier is applied. The web tool generates an interior lighting power report that is similar to the INT LTG space Excel form. Here's what the space-by-space report looks like for our example project prior to applying the reduced interior lighting power option. And here's what it shows after the option's been applied. Note in the upper right corner of the lighting power calculation table, it provides the compliance status. And in the lighting power allowance table, it shows that the 0.75 multiplier has been applied to the code LPA. Using this information, the designer can then determine what adjustments may be needed in their lighting design to comply with this option or credit. There is an additional efficiency package credit for enhanced lighting controls. A project can comply with this credit if at least 90% of the connected interior lighting power is provided with enhanced controls. The features that the controls must have to qualify include that each luminaire must be individually addressed, and it has to be controlled by a digital control system. The controls need to include occupancy sensing, daylight responsive controls, and then scheduling and illumination levels of the individual or groups of luminaires. They need to be able to be reconfigured through the control system. It can't have more than 8 luminaires controlled by a single daylight responsive device, and the luminaires all have to be configured for continuous dimming. Also, the control system has to be capable of load shedding. And in the case of an open or enclosed office area, the overhead general lighting needs to be configured to be individually adjusted by the occupants. Note that spaces served by luminaire level lighting controls can meet all of these requirements. So luminaire level lighting controls provide luminaire and device addressability, which is the ability to individually address each unique system device independent of electrical circuiting. They support networking of luminaires and devices so that each addressed fixture, switch, or sensor is capable of individually communicating digital data with all other fixture, switches, or sensors in that room or space. They include occupancy and daylight sensing controls and automatic light level continuous dimming. Note that there is a definition in the 2018 WSEC that defines what luminaire level lighting controls are. And so when you read through the definition, you'll see that this combination of features meets the definition of LLC in the 2018 WSEC. So now let's talk about mechanical systems. There are 2 mechanical efficiency credit package types: enhanced HVAC equipment efficiency and enhanced dedicated outside air systems. To comply with the enhanced equipment efficiency credit, the HVAC equipment has to have a rated efficiency that is at least 15% better than code minimum. And if a TSPR score is required, that score needs to be 10% better than the required minimum. And this credit may be applied to the whole building, building addition, or tenant space. For the enhanced dedicated outside air system credit, the DOAS shall have energy recovery with 80% sensible energy recovery effectiveness. And the total system fan power cannot exceed 0.5 watts per CFM. This credit also can be applied to the whole building, building addition, or the tenant space. Here's a credit weighting for these packages. Note that the high performance DOAS has the same credit weighting for all building occupancies. There are 4 different criteria defined for the HVAC equipment efficiency credit, and it also requires that no less than 90% of the total installed HVAC capacity has to meet these criteria to be eligible or to qualify for this particular credit. So the first one, the HVAC equipment must be types that are listed in the WSEC equipment efficiency tables. The reason for this is the equipment has to have a minimum required code efficiency to compare to. The equipment must have rated efficiency that is 15% better than code minimum efficiency. And note that this requirement applies to all of the applicable criteria. So if you have a packaged piece of equipment that has both heating and cooling, that it has to meet that 15% better than code requirement for both the heating and cooling efficiency. And if you have equipment that has full load and part load efficiency criteria, that has to be 15% better for both the full load and part load. If you have any standalone fans, they are required to have a fan efficiency not less than 71 FEG. And if the system is required to comply with the total system performance ratio, the performance score needs to exceed the required score by 10%. When the additional efficiency package option provision went into effect under the 2015 WSEC, we initially thought that the HVAC credit would be the most straightforward of the available options. However, the requirement that all applicable equipment efficiency criteria be 15% better than code proved to be problematic for several common equipment types. In the case of heat pumps, many can meet the higher efficiency requirement on the cooling side, but not on the heating side. To address this issue, a new exception has been added to the 2018 WSEC. What this exception allows is that all rated efficiencies compared to code target efficiencies can be average weighted. So the resulting overall weighted average efficiency percentage has to be at least 15% better than code. And then at minimum, all equipment shall have a rated efficiency that is at least 5% better than the code target. So what this all means is that you're able to take all of the criteria, all the efficiency criteria that needs to be 15% better than code, and you can put them all together and average weight them. And as long as the resulting total is at least 15% better than code, then the project will comply with this efficiency credit. And then note that this last detail essentially makes it not possible to comply with this credit if the project has gas pack equipment, because it has to be at least 5% better than the code target. We also received feedback that due to the limitation for a semi-heated space, which is that equipment with cooling capacity is not allowed, it's nearly impossible to meet the criteria for the HVAC equipment efficiency credit for the space conditioning category. So to address this, there's a new exception that's been added to the HVAC equipment efficiency credit that creates a compliance path for low energy and semi-heated spaces. So to comply with this exception, at least 90% of the installed heating capacity has to be electric or gas-fired infrared heating equipment, and that equipment must serve only localized heating applications. So, for example, in the picture here, you've got an automotive repair facility, and they have the radiant heating directly over the work base. So it's just only providing localized heating in those areas. And then if that low energy or semi-heated space has any standalone supply, return, or exhaust fans, then they're required to comply with that 71 FEG requirement. So the WSEC commercial web tool addresses the HVAC equipment efficiency credit. So note that prior to applying the enhanced HVAC equipment efficiency credit, the example in this sample project here, all equipment in this sample project complies with the minimum efficiency requirement as it's noted here. If the designer wishes to check to see if their project meets the enhanced HVAC equipment efficiency credit, they can turn it on and off here. Note that this requirement is different than, say, the component performance or for envelope or space by space for lighting, in that the HVAC credit, each individual piece of equipment has to be checked for compliance for all applicable efficiency criteria. So in this example project, the proposed heat pump efficiency for both cooling and heating is less than the required efficiency once that 15% multiplier, so in this case a multiplier of 1.15 is applied. To assist the designer, the minimum required efficiency value is included in the proposed cooling efficiency title. So this value here, so here it shows a minimum of 16.1, which is what would normally be, I think for this equipment, the minimum efficiency is 14, but once you apply the 1.15 multiplier, it's now 16.1. So this automatically adjusts when the HVAC equipment efficiency button is selected. And this information is also automatically adjusted when an economizer exception that requires better than code efficiency is selected. So it automatically adjusts for both. So now let's talk about the DOAS credit. To summarize what we covered back in episode 2 for mechanical systems, the most substantive change to the DOAS provision in the 2018 WSEC is that the scope of this requirement has been expanded to include more occupancies. The scope is now defined based on IBC occupancy groups, which is listed in a new table in the code. During the 2015 WSEC code cycle, the Washington State Building Code Council provided some helpful guidance about the specifics of where DOAS is required. It was clarified that this provision applies to areas within buildings that are required to be served by a DOAS. Another detail they addressed was that with regards to accessory occupancies, that per the SBCC interpretation, accessory areas are not required to be served by a DOAS. Per the IBC, an accessory occupancy is an area within a building that is ancillary to the primary building occupancy. So, for example, a retail gift shop within a building designated as the museum would be considered accessory as long as the square foot area of the gift shop does not exceed 10% of the floor area on the store that is located on. So when thinking about DOAS systems and the WSEC, there are 3 potential levels of performance. 2 are defined in the WSEC and 1 is an above code measure. So there's the prescriptive DOAS requirements. There's the high efficiency DOAS additional efficiency credit, and there's very high efficiency DOAS, which is an above code strategy. To comply prescriptively, there are 3 key requirements. The core requirement is that the delivery of ventilation air be decoupled from heating and cooling. And then changes in the 2018 WSEC impact the other 2 requirements, which are energy recovery and fan power. A system may comply via 60% sensible only energy recovery effectiveness, or it may now comply via 50% enthalpy, which accounts for both sensible and latent recovered energy. For fan efficiency, the code now defines a maximum of 1 watt per CFM for a DOAS with total fan motor horsepower less than 5 horsepower. For a DOAS with fan motor horsepower equal to or greater than 5 horsepower, the system is required to comply with the usual fan power limitation provisions. The 5 horsepower threshold includes the supply, exhaust, and any recirculation fans used for the purpose of ventilation delivery. For the DOAS energy efficiency credits, there are 2 key changes in the 2018 WSEC. First of all, spaces that are required to comply with the DOAS provisions are no longer allowed to take credit for this to meet the required additional efficiency credits. So in other words, no more double dipping, folks. The other change is that there is now a new high efficiency DOAS credit. To comply, equipment is required to have at least 80% sensible heat recovery effectiveness, and the fan efficiency must be less than 0.5 watts per CFM. Note that under the prescriptive requirement, the sensible heat recovery effectiveness needs to be at least 60%, and the fan efficiency needs to be less than 1 watt per CFM. Note that building areas that are not required to comply with DOAS, that are provided with a high efficiency DOAS, may comply for both credit packages. There is an above code measure referred to as very high efficiency DOAS. This strategy is a whole system approach that combines high efficiency ERV or HRV equipment with optimized heating and cooling systems, such as high efficiency heat pumps or VRF systems. The ERV or HRV is required to have heat recovery sensible effectiveness of at least 82%, so 2% better than the 2018 WSEC DOES energy efficiency credit. Fan power is minimized further by focusing on reducing duct pressure drop and by operating ventilation fans within the optimal range of the fan curve. So for additional information about this high efficiency strategy, we recommend visiting the Better Bricks website. They have a lot of helpful information, including system requirements, case studies, and pilot demonstrations. And their website address is right here at the bottom of the slide. So now let's talk about surface water heating and kitchen energy efficiency credits. There are 2 surface water efficiency credit packages and a credit for enhanced commercial kitchen equipment. To comply with the surface water heating efficiency credit, the surface water heating load shall be handled by high efficiency systems, recovered energy, or on-site renewable energy. The credits are applicable to specific building types, and it may be applied to the whole building, building addition, or the tenant space. The enhanced commercial kitchen credit requires Energy Star labeled dishwashers, fryers, steam cookers, and ovens. Here's the credit weighting for these packages. Note that a group R1, R2, or the all other category of building occupancy can satisfy all 6 credits with a high efficiency surface water heating system. The base surface water heating system credit is applicable to specific occupancy types and can be complied with using various high-performance technologies. There are only minor changes to this credit in the 2018 WSEC. Credit 9 is a new credit specifically for Group R occupancies only. Note that this is an either-or credit for Group R2 buildings. There are 2 primary criteria for the base surface water heating credit. First of all, 90% of the conditioned floor area must be one of the occupancies listed in this provision that commonly have high surface water heating loads, or a building that meets a minimum qualifying surface water heating load condition. The occupancies include Group R1, which is boarding houses, hotels, and motels, Group I2, which are hospitals and nursing homes, Group A2, which covers restaurants, banquet halls, and food prep facilities. There's Group F for laundries, and then Group A3 for health clubs and spas. So the qualifying load conditions, those are defined as buildings where the surface water heating load is at least 10% of the total building energy load based on a total building performance energy model. Or it could be buildings where the surface water heating energy use is at least 15 kBTU per square foot per year per some alternate load calculation method. And if that is the plan, you do need to talk with your jurisdiction ahead of time to make sure that you have pre-approval for that calculation method. So technologies to comply with the base surface water heating credit include high efficiency heat pump technology, waste heat recovery, or on-site renewable energy systems that handle at least 60% of the annual serviced hot water heating energy use. For buildings that are subject to the heat recovery for surface water heating provision, which already requires 60% of the annual surface water heating energy use to be handled by an energy recovery system. In this case, the system that complies with this high efficiency credit is required to handle 100% of the annual surface hot water heating energy use. Note that we think the section referenced in this provision is a typo and should be pointing to C403.9.2.1. This provision defines facilities where heat recovery for surface water heating is required to be those that operate 24 hours per day, that have water-cooled systems exceeding 125 tons of heat rejection, and have a total surface water heating load exceeding 250,000 BTUH. The new surface water heating energy efficiency credit is only applicable to buildings where at least 90% of the conditioned floor area is Group R2. To qualify for this credit, surface water heating is provided by either a central heat pump water heating system or by individual unit high efficiency heat pump water heaters. The water heating systems shall handle at least 90% of the annual service hot water heating energy use to comply with this new credit. Another new credit is for enhanced commercial kitchen equipment. This credit is only applicable for Group A2 occupancy buildings or where the primary use of the building is as a commercial kitchen. To comply with this credit, the kitchen has to have at least one gas or electric fryer. And then all dishwashers, fryers, steam cookers, and ovens, they all need to be Energy Star rated. So the Energy Star label needs to be current per specifications as of January 2018. And then the Energy Star qualified model, you do need to include that in the permit documents. So this can't be something that is selected after permit review. It needs to actually be included in the permit set. And then the equipment does have to be installed prior to the certificate of occupancy, which sometimes that, or actually often that's not the case, that this type of equipment is installed later. So to qualify for this credit, that equipment does have to already be on site so that the jurisdiction can verify that all of the equipment is Energy Star rated. So last but not least, let's talk about the on-site renewable energy credit. This credit has the same weighting for all of the building occupancies. So back in episode 5 about lighting and electrical systems, we talked about a new provision in the 2018 WSEC that requires accommodations for a future solar array in non-residential new construction buildings that are 20 stories or less above grade. The purpose of this new requirement is to encourage more widespread utilization of on-site renewable energy. We've had conversations with various industry professionals, particularly electrical engineers, about what is required to integrate a solar system into a building. They noted that if accommodations are not incorporated when the building is first constructed, it will most likely be more expensive, and in some cases much more expensive, to incorporate a solar system into the building down the road. The on-site renewable energy credit may be applied to the whole building, building addition, or tenant space. Our interpretation is that if a project complies with all of the solar readiness requirements and includes installation of the solar array in the project, then this fulfills the solar readiness requirement and the project may claim the renewable energy credit, provided that the system capacity meets the minimum capacity defined in this provision and the table, which is C406.5. So with regards to calculation of the required renewable energy system capacity to comply with this credit, the language in this credit is a little unclear. Our interpretation is that the required annual rate of production needs to be calculated based on the total conditioned floor area of the whole building. So that's how you determine the required rate. And then our unofficial interpretation is that this rate is then applied to the applicable square foot area of either the whole building, building addition, or tenant space that the credit is being applied to. We hope this makes sense, and we're going to be looking into confirming this interpretation. Okay, so that concludes our training today about the additional energy efficiency credits in the 2018 WSEC. Thanks for listening, and thanks again for participating in our webinar series. We've received several questions via Q&A. We'll go through a few of your questions and share our initial feedback. And then after the webinar, we'll put together a list of all the participant questions posted along with responses to our from our Energy Code technical team. We'll send out this Q&A list as a supporting resource via email to everyone who's registered. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our new WSEC website along with the completed Q&A list. So give us a few minutes and we'll switch over to our live Q&A. Okay, testing audio.
Hi, Lisa. Can you hear me? This is Dwayne.
I can hear you. Can you hear and see me?
I can hear and see you. So thank you for that great presentation.
Yeah, thanks. It's a big topic to cover, a lot to talk about on this one, and it looks like we got some really great questions. So looking forward to diving into this.
I assume we'll continue this conversation probably for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think so too, for sure.
Yeah, we did have some good questions. I was kind of running a dual chat and Q&A, and I'll circle back to the chat here when we get done. But in the Q&A,
Okay.
Hoyt Jeter had a question about the enhanced air infiltration testing. What if they choose the testing and they do not meet it? What is the recourse that they can if they're not meeting the testing? How to resolve this?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? And so, and that actually was discussed and something that design teams have had to consider under the 2015 code as well. And so, the first step, of course, is to make sure that the whole team knows that that's the plan, so that the chances of the building actually being able to meet that criteria at the time of testing, that it's a good chance that they will. So that's the first thing, because if that's not the plan, then yeah, it could definitely be a higher risk. But then the other part of this is that if they can't pass that criteria, can't get there, then they would have to circle back with the jurisdiction and demonstrate compliance with a different credit. So that is the risk of that particular package in the code.
Great. Let me a second here. Whoops. Go back here. Okay, great. Derek had a question. How do you average weight HVAC efficiencies that are tested to different definitions and standards, such as SEER versus EER versus HSPF versus COP versus AFUE for the HVAC credit?
Yeah, that we could certainly get into the weeds on that one really quick. But the bottom line is that the way all of those are being evaluated are for that area weighting is that you're applying 15% better than code to each of those different criteria. And so there, the way actually there are other engineering firms during the 2015 code that actually proposed this, and that they approached jurisdictions asking if they can do this, that they had like maybe one or two pieces of equipment that didn't quite get there, but they had other pieces of equipment that were a lot better. And so they were able to put it into an Excel spreadsheet and make the case to the jurisdictions like, hey, look, I'm there except for this one piece. And I think it was mixed on whether that worked out for them. But the main thing is that you're applying that percentage to each different criteria. And so I hope that answers the question. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the quick answer. And we will definitely be following up with some support for that particular exception.
I just want to mention too that that's capacity weighted averaged also.
Yes.
So it will depend on what percentage of those particular issues may or may not have a large impact on that weighted average number.
Yeah, actually, that's the key point there. It is based on capacity, and so that's how the weighted average will work.
Okay, question from Marty. What if a shell is completed under the 2015 or earlier code, but tenants are under the 2018 code? Are credits prorated?
Good question, Marty. And Dwayne and I were just talking about that today, actually. Um, the answer to that is we are not sure how that is going to be handled. Now, there is precedent in the code for other things, and so this really lends itself to some interpretation by the State Building Code Council. So we do anticipate that a question will likely get submitted about this, but the precedent and I'm trying to remember which other criteria in the code had to do this. But the way it was handled is that um, they had to apply what was they didn't carry over the requirement from the 2015 code directly. They just focused on the part of the building that was being updated and had to meet, that has to meet the current code. I don't know if that helps, but again, we don't have an exact answer on that one yet because the code doesn't really say, but we do expect that a question is going to go to State Building Code Council about that. So hopefully stay tuned.
Great. Robert has a good question about high efficiency equipment to be eligible for the HVAC has to be listed in the code. So how would new technologies be addressed? Is the code limiting advances, or is there an alternate compliance path?
You know, for the quick answer is that for the credit, no, there isn't an alternate path. And if you think about it, to create a credit like this, they have to have something to compare against, and so they have to have some kind of a base that they compare to show that it's better, some percent better than that base. And so that means is that if there isn't a base, then you can't compare to it. And so I guess maybe Dwayne, you've got some more thoughts about this. The answer to that is that if you have some emergent technology and you can show that this is the standard and that we're this much better than code, I mean, you're always welcome to bring your ideas to the jurisdiction and get their feedback on it. But the credit itself is not structured to support that yet.
Yeah, I would just add, it's not the intent of the code to limit new technologies or alternative means or methods. And so, Robert, if you can cite this code is going to be in effect for the next few years. And so if there are new standards or AHRI listings or standards published in ASHRAE or other codes, the IECC, for example, and so you've got a baseline and you can address a rating and show that the improvement, I think that would be acceptable, and you would take that up with the jurisdiction.
That's right. Yeah. So this is one of those where you're just having a conversation with your jurisdiction and explaining, what you're trying to do is your best path for now, until there's, some language updates that would deal with that particular situation.
So Laurel has a question. Does low energy mean that completely unconditioned spaces such as parking garages are included and require additional efficiency credits?
Yeah, actually, it does. So if you look at that section in the code, it refers to unconditioned spaces. And so it was interesting when the State Building Code Council made this determination, that question did come up. It's like, well, if you require for low energy and you go through the list of credits, there really weren't that many credits that you could apply to that kind of a space, which is why this went in as an exception that allows low energy spaces to only have to meet the 3 credits versus 6. So hopefully that answers your question, but that was addressed with that exception.
Yeah, Laurel had another question concerning low energy. Do the low energy spaces also get included in the area weighted average calculation, or must those 3 credits be standalone? And I would say if the low energy space is within the scope of the permit, then it would be a weighted average and it would apply.
Yeah, I think
if it's a standalone, if the low energy space is a standalone permit or a tenant improvement, it would have to stand on its own unless it has transferable credits from something from the systems.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, because what the code talks about, it talks about mixed use buildings, which assumes that they're all fully conditioned areas and that you're doing a weighted average between the occupancy types because they have different credit weightings. And so the code addresses that. It doesn't address space conditioning types and this particular exception. So it's an interesting question, although I think the precedent of what is described under mixed use would be reasonable to apply to this, but the code does not talk about that directly. So they think that's another one to bring up with the jurisdiction. If you have that kind of a building where it's not standalone, but you've actually got multiple space conditioning types in your building.
So thank you. Dennis has a question, and I think we've covered part of this, but it's worth talking again. Could you cover tenant improvements to a building shell, the first tenant, which we did, but also to an office or warehouse remodel? So in other words, are additional efficiency credits required for an office or warehouse remodel?
Well, the quick answer to that one is that if it would only be if that project. So what I'm assuming the question is referring to is that this was a building that was already fully built out. So this is not the first build out, but it's actually doing a change of occupancy or a change of space conditioning. So the quick answer is if it's a change in space conditioning, then it is required to meet the credits. And then, so the answer would be yes, you'd be able to do it that way. But if it's just converting one conditioned space to another conditioned space type, then actually the C406 requirements don't apply to that project at all. So do you have any other thoughts on that, Dwayne?
No, that's exactly right. It's a maybe answer,
Yeah, it's
which if
maybe.
it's an existing office and it's a remodel and it was existing condition, then you wouldn't have to comply. If it's a change of use or change of space conditioning, you may have to apply. It's kind of on a case by case basis.
Yeah, yeah. And then I'll add one detail to this because I didn't get into it in this slide, and that is a change in occupancy is just going from FS or U to something other than FS or U, or going from commercial to residential and vice versa. So if you're going from, one condition or one occupancy type to another that doesn't include that, then it isn't considered if in that requirement a change in occupancy. So I know what would be a good example. Actually, I heard about it was a space that was converted from a conditioned warehouse to a CrossFit, right? And so it wasn't a change in space conditioning, and it wasn't FS or no, it wasn't a warehouse. It was something else. It was something that wasn't storage. But anyway, the main thing is that it's only those types of change in occupancy that trigger this. And so there's lots of projects that that's not the case.
Yeah.
Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that.
Derek has a question. Are
Mhm.
enhanced lighting controls required for areas where automatic shut-off or dimming of lights would present a safety hazard, such as a mechanical or boiler room?
Um, Good question. And so, well, first of all, what the credit says is that 90% of
90%.
all of the installed wattage has to have the enhanced controls. So that's the first layer. So if the area in question represents more than 10%, so if you got 15% or so, then I do believe that some of those exceptions would also kick in, and so that would not be included in the total percentage. Um, do you have any other thoughts on that, Dwayne?
No, that's as long as you still have to achieve that 90% threshold, but it is not the
Mhm.
intent of the code to require automatic controls where there would be a safety or security issue.
I think so,
There's
and I
exemptions. There's
yeah,
exemptions for that.
and I my thought on this, and this is I hadn't thought about this one before, so this is a really good question. The point is that I think you can apply that say that those spaces actually don't have to be counted in that 90%. But again, that's just an unofficial interpretation on that one. So
Yeah.
we'll look into that one a little further and include that in our Q&A response. That was a great question.
Okay. This is another question from Laurel. We kind of had a running chat on this issue, so I think it's good to discuss this again. For a shell and core building, would only the lighting fixtures included in the base building design or the shell and core, excluding the future TI, be evaluated for the 10% or 20% LPD reduction?
Yes, and that's what's really interesting about the way the credits are handled in shell and core, and the whole mix and match thing too. So if you think about the whole the shell and core part of the building, and if there are a couple that take care of the whole building, right, which are the envelope ones, and then the other ones, they only take care of the systems, right? And so if those systems installed are only taking care of certain areas that are built out under the shell and core, then that's where you have to show the compliance, because that's being built out at that time. But then the spaces that are not being built out at that time, that's pushed down to later under the permit for that tenant space build out. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the intent, is that you only have to show compliance with 6 credits for everything that's completed under the shell and core.
Within the scope of the permit, basically.
That's right. Exactly. Whatever's being built out within the scope of the permit.
Yep. And then Jacqueline has a question. Does the online calculator calculate the weighted average exception for enhanced HVAC equipment efficiency?
Yeah, Dwayne and I were just talking about this just a few minutes ago, and the answer is that that won't be included yet, but it's definitely on our wish list of features to add down the road. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we have seen other engineering firms that have put together their own spreadsheet to show this, and so there is some precedent there on how to do it. But yeah, stay tuned on that one. We have a long wish list of things we would love to build into the tool. And just, it's like any other web tool. You build it out over time. So we'll include that on our list for sure.
Yeah. Let me go. That's it for Q&A.
Looks
let
like
me
there's
go back.
Maybe some over in chat.
Yeah, Laurel had another question. It's actually the solar readiness that isn't an additional efficiency, but does 20-story non-residential building for solar readiness mean that a mixed-use residential plus commercial building under 20 stories would not require solar readiness? So the code language says 20-story non-residential building.
Yeah.
But in a mixed-use building under 20 stories, would solar readiness be required?
That's a very good question. And the code language, it doesn't say directly. So I'm just going to say off the top of my head right now, and I think we probably should look into this a little bit, is that my read is it says non-residential. And so if it's a mixed-use building, it's primarily residential with like just a floor retail, then I would say, yeah, I don't think that this would apply to that. But that might be debated. And so, Dwayne, what's your first thought on that one?
It's buildings and it's partly commercial, but I think we have to think about that, or even get some direction from the State Building Code Council, because we do have a lot of mixed-use buildings under 20 stories. So
yeah, and
find out what that intent was.
Exactly. But I think just the quick read on that one, if it says non-residential, and you've got a building where it's primarily residential, then I think it would be reasonable to assume that that building wouldn't have to comply. But you're right. I think this is a one where the State Building Code Council could definitely lend some guidance on that one.
Yeah, and then getting back to chat, there was quite a bit of discussion about the high efficiency DOAS option, and where people could get more information about manufacturers that actually meet those efficiency requirements. And I know you referenced NIA in there, and in fact, I think Maria from NIA spoke up and talked about the high efficiency DOAS option on that. But it's the code is unclear on rating conditions for how those DOAS systems are rated and tested because there's no AHRI standard. And I think this is just kind of a work in progress as we move on. Do you have any thoughts about the HE DOAS and the evolvement or the evolving industry there? I think that's going to be just evolving as we move in the code.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad they asked the question because I didn't include it in the presentation. But and I'm going to speak for Maria here. She's hopefully she's still on the line and she can toss in another comment here. But they are working on that. They're evaluating a variety of manufacturers and products and all that to identify which manufacturers can meet these higher criteria. And so that's something to be watching for at NIA. And so again, I would recommend going to that web link that was provided in the slide, and we'll include that in our follow-up information and check back there. I think Maria was saying that that's something that could be available here in the near future. So stay tuned on that one.
I think last one in chat that I actually answered, but it's good for the order group to answer for the group from Adam. Does the weighted efficiency apply to EER and IEER ratings? So in other words, when there's multiple ratings on a piece of equipment, does the plus 15% apply to all the ratings?
Yeah, that is the point, and on why this weighted average exception went into the code, because the answer is yes. The code's very clear that it does have to apply to all of the required efficiency criteria of the equipment. And so you would be looking like for a chiller, you've got full load and part load criteria, and you've got equipment that has, as you mentioned, EER and IEER. And so there's equipment out there that can meet one or two, but not all, right? And so that's what's nice about this weighted average, is it does allow you to look at all of the criteria for all of the equipment and average it all out. And as long as a whole, all of the equipment capacity can meet that, at least the 15%, then the building as a whole can comply.
Great. Last question, a good kind of wrap-up question from David Leahy. Is the information we presented available to be printed out to share with others, or do they have to watch it online?
That's a good question. Actually, right now we're posting the webinars, right? So if you go to our on-demand training page, all of the webinars that we've put on this summer, they're all posted and available to watch. I think that it would be a good idea for us to post some printed material to go with that as well. And so stay tuned for that. And actually, I'm glad he asked, because there's one last thing I want to mention, and that lots and lots of folks have asked us about CEUs. And so the good news is that we're now a preferred provider, an ICC preferred provider, and so we are going to be able to offer CEUs. Right now, we're just trying to work out what that's going to look like for an online training. So there might be a little bit of follow-up that folks will have to do, but we are working on that. So as soon as that gets finalized, we'll notify everyone who is interested in getting their CEUs what they'll need to do to be able to get their certificate. So stay tuned on that. You'll be getting an email from us very soon.
Good news. So that's it. That's all we had for Q&A and chat. So any final words, Lisa?
Well, the only thing I want to say is that, hey, thanks everyone. We've had wonderful response to this webinar series. We had to learn to do this a little different way. We've been doing classroom trainings for a long time, and it's been great to see such great support for our webinar series. And we kind of learned as we went, as we learned to use the new tool and all that. But we will definitely be doing more trainings like this, because we've heard from you and understand that this works really well for everybody. So just a big thank you to everybody else for all your participation.
Great. Okay, then goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye,
Signing off.
everyone. Have a great rest of your summer.